They started saying it in the Cafaneo the first week the foreigners arrived, while the flies drew figure eights around the spoon suites and the metal chairs squeaked like crickets every time someone shifted his weight. Are we descended from Ouranopithecus or not? Over and over, they tapped their cigarette ash and said that phrase, as if the question itself was a pebble rattling in the mouth being turned and turned until smooth. I'm 12, and I can tell when the men are pleased to argue about something new. You can see it in the way they sit forward at the table, elbows planted, a finger ready to stab the important word out of the air. They had argued about everything, football teams, whether Caramanlis was a saint or a liar, if the new bridge over the Gallicos River would ever actually get finished. But Ouranopithecus, this was a new animal for their mouths, a long one with syllables like stairs. I liked that name very much, because it had Aurano at the beginning, like the sky, so it felt like the sort of word that might be said quietly at night staring up at the stars, and also Pithecos, which even a 12-year-old knows is about monkeys. Our village is not big. To say it, you must pucker the lips a bit, as if you're about to whistle, Zyrakori. There's dust most of the year, and the lime-colored leaves on the olive trees look silver when the wind flips them, and the cicadas in the brambles sing a song that is also the sound of heat. We're in northern Greece, not so far from Thessaloniki that you can't smell the salt on a good day if the wind is smart, and not so near that you can see the sea. Mama runs the cafe that pretends sometimes to be a small taverna when my uncle Manolis brings fresh sardines or when a goat is given up for a name day feast. The sign faded before I was born from blue to a sort of cornflower ghost, cave to Perry's Terry. The Pigeon Cafe. No pigeons are allowed inside. There are usually 3 men there in the morning, 7 in the afternoon, and after sundown there is always at least one arguing about the past with someone else arguing about the future in the way of people who feel time as if they were sitting in the middle of a rope being pulled by cart horses on either side. The foreigners first appeared in a little convoy that made all of us stop what we were doing. Mama set down her tray so hard the spoons rattled. They were in dusty cars with numbers on their doors and rolled-up plans poked out of the back window of one like a rolled-up mat. On the white car, there was a little sticker of a flag I didn't know then, blue with a white cross, but not our blue. It was darker, and the cross was like the ones in A Night Story. French, Mama guessed, the way she guesses whether a pot of beans needs more salt just by breathing near it. Don't stare. It's rude. Bring out the pitcher of cold water, Neko. I carried water to their table, and the leader, a tall man with a nose like a mountain ridge and grey hair combed back so tightly it seemed a sort of thought had slicked his head, smiled down and said, Evcharisto, very carefully, each syllable like a chop with a knife. You're welcome, I told him. His Greek had that thick aftertaste of another language trying to disguise itself. He tapped the table with a knuckle, then pointed to the dusty hill behind the village, where the scrub looks like sheep scattered and forgotten. There? Fossils. That's how they entered our days. The first week after they arrived, the whole business of Ouranopithecus began winding itself through our conversations like a twine. The priest, Papathanasis, who always smelled faintly of beeswax and cloves, came and drank a coffee and nodded to them and asked polite questions in his coaxing voice while his beard shone in the afternoon light. He had eyes that looked watery even when he wasn't going to cry. My friend Eleni, who is sometimes braver than me and sometimes makes faces with her tongue stuck out when adults get too proud, sat with me under the mulberry tree and watched the archaeologists the paleontologists. I learned the difference that week unpack their boxes and set delicate brushes in neat rows. Why do they need so many brushes? She whispered. It's not hairdressing. They're going to brush the earth, I told her, feeling a little expert because one of the French women had let me hold a tiny paintbrush and told me, in careful Greek, that it was used for cleaning dirt from bones older than anyone's grandfather's grandfather's grandfather. You don't want to scratch the bones. These bones are from conscripts, she asked. Her older brother was away in the army, and everything became about conscripts in their house. Do they find the bones and bring them to do paperwork? Not those bones, I said, and because I'm 12 and I get impatient sometimes, these bones are very old. Like, older than the old men in the square. Older than the church. Older than everything. She rolled her eyes. Oh. Those bones. Are we descended from Ouranopithecus or not? Costas said that first day in the afternoon. Costas is my mother's cousin who wears his hair like he is still 25 even though he is not, and who smokes thin cigarettes like he is French even though he is not. He leans back in his chair with the two front legs hanging in air as if he has a deal with gravity. Tell us, Mr. Lewis, he called, because he had already learned the tall man's name, do we have your monkey in our family? The tall man Monsieur Lewis smiled in a way that had patience in it like cotton stuffed into a cushion to make it soft. Monsieur? Not monkey. Ape. And family. He pressed his lips together, searching for the word, then spread his hands wide as if showing a big olive grove. Complicated. Complicated. Costas shouted, like that meant he had won an argument he hadn't even begun. Complicated means you can't answer. Complicated means, said one of the Greek scientists, they weren't all French, and Mama knew one from the university in Thessaloniki that Ouranopithecus is an ape from about 9 million years ago. That's fact. Big jaws, thick teeth enamel, broad cheekbones. We have some skull pieces. We have jaws. But whether that ape is directly your great-great-great, he took a breath, rolled his eyes up as if counting more greats than he had air for, grandfather, or just your grandfather's cousin, another branch on the tree, that we cannot say now. Our grandfather's cousins are all drunks, Costas said. So it makes sense. No drunks, Mr. Lewis said pleasantly. We think Ouranopithecus was maybe quite strong. Ate hard things. Perhaps nuts. He pretended to crack a nut with his molars, chewing deliberately. Everyone at the table laughed. Even Papathanasis's beard moved a little as if he wanted to chuckle but thought about it as a priest and then did not. I stood close as I could, cupping my hand under the drip of the water pitcher because the handle always leaks when it is full, and looked at Mr. Lewis. What does it look like? I asked. My voice wanted to be big, but then I remembered that children are supposed to be quiet around strangers, so it came out like a reed whistle. Which? Ouranopithecus, he asked, pleased maybe that someone wanted to hear the story and not just argue. He took a napkin and a pencil from behind his ear and made a drawing so quick his hand moved like a bird dipping. He drew a cheek, then a jaw, big and square. He drew a tooth, a molar, with ridges that looked like a mountain seen from far away, but he kept his careful lines. Was not chimpanzee, not gorilla, not human. Ape of here. He pointed to the ground with the pencil in a sort of salute. Macedonia. We named him Macedonensis, because in science we like to say new things with old words. You named him Sky Ape from Macedonia, I said, liking how that sounded. I tucked the sound away for later when I would say it to myself in bed. Sky Ape. How good to have a sky in your name. When Papo told stories about Alexander talking to the sky, I imagined Ouranopithecus sitting behind a rock and watching, chewing something hard and wondering what this thin striding boy was with a spear. My head is filled with little theaters where different times play. If I listen carefully, I can hear the rattles of the donkey cart and the radio song and something else under that, the far distant chewing of a jaw 9 million years ago. I decided then I would carry water to the dig in the afternoons after school whenever Mama's back was turned long enough for me to slip away with the excuse of I'm taking the oranges to the goats. People who are grown up like to think children don't like work, but that's not true. Work that makes you feel important and part of something big is like candy with sugar inside of sugar. Anyway, if I'm being honest, the goats didn't mind missing their oranges. Goats pretend to be dramatic about food, but give them a few bramble leaves and a tin can, and they are poets of satisfaction. Walking to the site in the heat of June is like walking inside a brass pot the sun is playing with. The earth is dusty and makes ghosts of your footsteps several times a day. You brush the dust marks off your legs and the dust returns, as if it didn't like being alone and wanted your company. The ravine behind our village, the one with the perfectly ugly name Ravitio Uvroche, Ravin de la Pluie, the French call it, as though the rain is a person who owned the ravine and wrote his name on a sign. It cuts a scar through the yellowed land and shows, if you walk carefully, the layers like a cake that no one thought to ice. The lowest layers are like stale bread, brown and crumbling, and there are pebbles that were shells once, Aunt Vasiliki says, and the layers above it are lighter, and then darker, and then at the top the bushes with their tiny stars of flowers that smell like a stowaway candy hidden in your pocket too long. When the men talked about the Miocene, I imagined a giant like the giants in Papo's songs, a man so big he needed mountains for shoes, stepping across an empty plain with bare feet. I didn't understand what a scene could be that lasted millions of years. How could there be a scene that was just wind and grass and the slow chewing of animals? The paleontologists brought their carefulness with them and spread it on the ground like a rug. Every tool had a place, every notebook had neat lines of dates, and at the top of each page, the words RPL or ZR or something like a code. When the light fell at a certain angle, I could see the holes they had carved, square like a chessboard, each a neat bite out of the earth. They taught me to sit on the edge and watch, not to step on the faces of the squares where there might be something hiding. They taught me to be quiet when someone cried out quietly, "Look," and everyone leaned in at once. The first time I saw a tooth, I thought my own teeth remembered something. It was like a mirror of chewing. The tooth was big as my thumbnail and yellow-brown like the coffee Mama gives to Costas in the afternoon when he says he's giving up smoking. He has said this many times. It was stuck in an earth that had to be teased to let it go. The woman with the strong ponytail, who had arms like ropes, used a tiny pick as if she were working on a gold watch. She flicked the dirt away and then blew on it in a puff, and then more dirt, and then, slowly, it came into view. "Molar," she said, lip curling up like a secret. "Look at the enamel. This enamel could break an almond." "I can break an almond," I said, wanting to be not just nearby, but useful. I bit down on my tongue by accident and pretended I had meant to do that. She smiled at me without looking up. "Don't use your teeth on anything that still wants them," she said. "You will regret it later, when you have fake teeth, and they jump in your soup." Eleni came in the afternoons too, when she could, although her mother wanted her at home helping to pick grape leaves or wash the stoop with a broom like a small parade leading the day out. She and I made a kind of religion out of finding small things. We found bits of broken pottery that were from our grandfather's house and not from any ancient times, but we put them in our pockets like a secret. We found, once, a bit of carved bone that was just our imagination. A cat had chewed it and gave it lovely little scallops. We found shells that looked like you could have eaten the snail yesterday, and I thought about the sea sliding up over our heads like a curtain and then sliding away again, and how the world is shy in slow motion. There are smells that belong to the time of the dig in my head in a box. The smell of sun baking the little shrubs until they threw out a peppery odor like the food on Saints' days when Mama puts herbs under a chicken and the whole house feels hotter from the smell in the air. The smell of the brush's tiny hairs, which is a smell you can only get if you hold them very close to your upper lip, the smell of the dust that has been under the ground for a very long time and comes up reluctantly like a shy boy to be introduced to the light. The smell of our village when the KTEL bus grinds to a stop out front and a hot wave of diesel passes as if a dragon had exhaled. And, later, after the quake, the smell of plaster, chalky and sour and clinging to the back of your throat like fear. But first it was just heat and dust and the voices of strangers asking careful questions with words sharpened like pencils. They teased Ouranopithecus out of the ravine in pieces, a jaw here, a cheekbone there, another tooth. They put each thing into plaster jackets like little mummies and wrote the codes RPL 125 and a string of numbers and letters that made the bones seem like they had addresses and houses and might get letters in the post from their cousins in other ravines. At night, when we closed the cafe and the tree frogs started their metallic tink-tinking from the ditch by the road, I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling where the paint cracks in a pattern like a map. I mapped the world in my head. Zyrakori was a small crooked diamond. Thessaloniki was a larger circle that glowed with lights I could not see except when Mama took me to the doctor once to see about my cough and I looked up at the buildings so tall I felt like a crumb on a table. Somewhere beyond the mountains to the north, there were borders and beyond them countries with names that end in IA like a flock of sheep all bleeding, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria. That's what Papa says when he calls from Germany, from München where he works in a factory where the machines are so clean you could eat your lunch from them. He says, Nikaki, you take care of Mama. Nikki Mao, and I run my hand over the crack in the ceiling and hope the birds will get his voice to me faster next time. He is a guest arbiter, a guest worker, and sometimes I think about that word, how a guest sits at a table that is not his and he tries to be polite even when the soup has something in it he is not used to. I imagine my father sitting in a room where German is thrown around like pieces of wood and he catches it with his hands and stacks it neatly. Mama doesn't talk much about Papa when the men are in the cafe. It's like a cat that sleeps under the oven and only comes out when the kitchen is empty. When she is washing the cups and the water is spitting because the tap is old and angry, she sings little pieces of songs under her breath, and sometimes I hear a word that makes me think of Papa, and she sees it in my face and pinches my cheek for making her remember and says, "Don't stand there like a lamp post. Bring me the sugar." Life turned like a wheel, slowly, and then all at once. I remember the day of the earthquake in slices, as if it were a loaf of bread someone cut while thinking of something else so the slices are uneven, some too thin and some fat and ragged. It was Wednesday, a day that always feels like a chair wobbling to me, not the beginning, not the end, with an uncertainty that makes me fidget. The air smelled like thunderstorms but the sky was a pitiless bright. We had both doors at the cafe open so that a little breeze could disturb the stale thoughts inside. The men were talking about the European community and whether Greece was going to be allowed to enter, and Costas had snapped a match with his fingers with a flourish and said, "Of course they'll want us, we are the ones who invented the words they use to make themselves important." Mama snorted. Mama can put more information in a snort than many people can put in a whole speech. Around 8 in the evening, just after 8, when the shadows get stupid and long in the way that makes you feel a little comical about your own feet, the world made a sound. It came like a heavy truck at the edge of town, a grinding. Everyone went quiet in the way dogs go quiet when they are evaluating another dog. The glasses on the shelf shivered and whispered to one another, The spoon in the coffee cup ticked against the porcelain like a nervous insect. And then the shaking came. It was not violent in the way stories sometimes make it be. No church fell down on our heads. The oil lamp did not break. But the earth became untrustworthy under my feet, and all the things you draw on the inside of your heart to show yourself that life has certain rules. Here is the table, here is the shelf, here is the wall that stays where it is. Those lines wobbled and blurred like they had been drawn in a moving bus. Mama put her hand on my head and bent me under the table in one motion that made me think maybe she had practiced this. Outside, someone said a many-syllabled swear word that is only used when death is discussed, and then the word outside again. The chairs scraped back, the door was full of men trying to become one man who could fit through it, and then we were in the square with everyone else, and the sky seemed important and uninterested at the same time. The big eucalypt on the corner flapped its leaves in a way that made us all feel like we'd been caught doing something not wrong but private. The shaking did not last long. Less than a minute, they said. Less than a minute. But that minute stretched like bread dough on a hot day, so that I felt I could see into it and count every bubble. When it stopped, we all made the sounds you make when something that could have hurt you much more has walked past you with a bad face and a generous heart. We laughed, shaky, we talked loudly, we bragged. The radio, which is more reliable than any of the men in our village, told us that the earthquake was strong, 6.2 on some scale of science that counted the nervous system of the earth in numbers and decimals. Its heart had beat near Thessaloniki, and in the city some buildings had cracked like old bread and a few had fallen like poorly made arguments. People were hurt. People were scared. People were out in the squares of their neighborhoods, and all of us were a larger version of that, tiny villages within the village of the region within the village of the country, all standing under the same quiet sky. I wanted to run to the ravine to see if the little squares that the paleontologists had made had fallen in, but Mama held me with a hand that was not up for discussion. If they are clever, they are already there, she said. Mama believes in the cleverness of other people only when she is feeling merciful. Wait. She started making coffee the way other people start praying. When her hands move, the world gets simpler for a moment. An hour later, when the radio's voice had become part of the dark, a careful string of words that repeated like the sea, I slid to the edge of the square where the long weeds are and into the alley that smells of lemon rinds and old onions and ran. Eleni ran too. Of course she did. She always knows when it is time to run. We found the ravine changed. Not spectacled, changed like a magician had turned a chicken into a rabbit. But changed like someone had lifted up the edge of a rug and the dust under it had been revealed. The squares were half collapsed where one side had been sullen and gave up. The little trowels lay where they had fallen, a brigade of tin soldiers who had fainted. Mr. Lewis was there, of course, with his headlamp strapped on, his face pale as if the lamp was inside him, shining out, and the woman with the rope muscles and the Greek scientist with the careful notes. I like to think of him as a note with a man attached. They were quiet in that buzzing way that made everything around them go quieter. "Stand here," Mr. Lewis said in Greek when he saw us, not surprised to find children where there was something interesting, as grown-ups always pretend to be. He pointed to a safe patch of ground. "We have to see if anything." His eyes fell to something at the edge of the sagging square and widened in a way that was almost boyish. He said a word in French so quickly I couldn't catch it, and then, in Greek, soft, like you might tell something sleeping that you are there so it wouldn't startle, "Hello." Even with my less than 13 eyes, I saw it. A curve at first, then, as the dust fell away with each breath of the wind and each cautious brush stroke from the woman's steady hand, the round swelling that could only be bone. It was like the earth had smiled and shown a tooth, except it wasn't a tooth. It was the curve of a brow ridge, it was the sutures where pieces of a skull come together like the meeting of small roads in a field. It was not a whole skull. No treasure does us the favor of arriving whole, we have to bring our patience with us to make up the missing bits, but it was enough to make everyone stand taller and talk lower. Is that? Eleni whisper shouted, because whispering and shouting at the same time is a skill girls have that boys can't learn. She reached for my sleeve and I realized, suddenly, that I had sweat running down my spine even though the night had gotten cool. Cranial fragments, the Greek scientist said, as if the words themselves were a coin he could polish. Possible zygomatic cheekbones, he added, remembering his audience. Ouranopithecus. I said, because if it was something else, that would be like a story where the hero goes to find one thing and then finds something else, and that is exciting but also frustrating. Likely, he said, but with the carefulness that had already been explained to me as the true way to be with science. You don't say what you cannot say. You say what you can. You don't say what you cannot say, I repeated softly to myself, liking that rule very much. It's a rule adults should also use when they're talking about politics. They worked until late because the Earth's timing is not based on the bus schedule. They put the chalky bits into their plaster beds and the date on their pages had a neat little note next to it: earthquake, collapse of trench, so that later some other person in a faraway room could imagine the smell of dust and the way Mr. Lewis's headlamp made a halo for him. In the days after the earthquake, the air felt like a drawer that had been opened too forcefully and then not quite closed. People slept outside, even if their houses didn't have cracks, because once the ground has moved, the inside of your house feels like a liar and the outside feels like a friend again. Thessaloniki was hurt worse. The radio brought news like a slow drip: a building collapsed that had been old and tired already, people were trapped and then not trapped, the rotunda lost some pieces. The city that had always been an idea to me, a place of tall buildings and bugitsa shops and bus drivers who think they are racing their mothers to the hospital, became a place that could be hurt the way a knee gets hurt, smudged blood on an otherwise clean leg. Mama had a cousin near Vartaris Square who called to say she was fine. They had slept in the car and then on the sidewalk with a blanket. We make tents, Papa Thanasis said, his hands moving in a sign of something that might have been prayer or might have been the shape of a tent, in his hands. The two are not so different. He arranged for the church courtyard to be a camp for a week. He went around with a stack of blankets on his shoulder and a bag of bread in his arms and spoke to each person as if he knew their exact thoughts and agreed with them. Father, I asked him, while Mama was handing him leftover chickpeas as if they were more precious than the gold in the church screen, which is not gold, it is shiny, but I'm 12 and even I know that. What do you think about Ouranopithecus? Are we descended from him or not? He smiled at me with that beard-moving thing again. What do I think? He scratched his face thoughtfully, which made a sound like a broom on fresh snow. I think that God gives us all kinds of gifts. This brain that argues and wonders and looks in the ground for our old faces, this is a gift. The fact that the ground holds onto our old faces so that we can see them and be humbled, that is a gift. Are we descended from Ouranopithecus? I think you should ask the people with the brushes. He winked. But I think we are descended from our choices. If we choose kindness, then all our grandfathers, monkey or man, sit up a little straighter in their graves and feel proud. That was a priest's answer, but it warmed me like a cup of milk. Mama's sister, my Aunt Vasiliki, made fun of me for hanging around the bone people. She called me archaeologia, little archaeologist, even though I kept correcting her that I was the opposite, a little paleontologist, which is a word with more bones in it literally and also in the mouth. She said, if you want to hang around with bones so much, hang up the fish skeletons under the awning to keep the flies off the food. She would click her tongue at me when I tried to read their notes upside down. She found the whole business of the past a little boring because it didn't feed you. Does old make soup? She asked. Does yesterday wash the plates? It makes today, I would say, because I had heard one of the scientists say that, and I like stealing their cleverness. Today doesn't hang in the air like laundry. It has pegs. Your mother has a little genius, Aunt Vasiliki said to Mama in the way adults think children cannot hear. You have been too careful. He has not banged his head enough. Eleni, when I told her this, laughed so hard her nose ran and she had to wipe it on her sleeve. She wiped and then made a face at her sleeve. The future archaeologist, she whispered, bowing. I pushed her shoulder with the back of my hand, and she pushed me back and soon we were both lying in the dust making grass search for our noses. One day, Mr. Lewis brought a big book to the cafe to show Mama. He laid it out on the sticky table and pressed down the corners with salt shakers so the pages wouldn't flip. There were pictures, black and white photographs of skulls that looked like people who had been asleep for so long their bones forgot what warmth was. He pointed to a drawing of a jaw with heavy teeth and spoke in Greek with his awkward but careful rhythm. This, we think, is Ouranopithecus macedonensis, discovered in these valleys, Ravindalaplui and Zyrakori, yes. Near Thessaloniki. He is 8 to 9 million years old, from a time called the Late Miocene. He is Ouranopithecus but he is not monkey. See no tail. And his face tells us he ate hard things, perhaps in a land that was open, with savanna, maybe he searched for the word, made little grass waves with his hand, grasslands and woodlands. Did he talk? I asked, because there are practical matters to be settled. Did he know he lived near the sea that would go away and come back? Did he go to school? Oh, no, Mr. Lewis said, smiling with his eyes. He was someone who would look at you and you would see something in the eyes, you know, but he would not say to you who you are. You are Nico. No. He drew a line in the air. But maybe he looks at you and you both know that water is wet, and that if you throw a peach pit it is hard and you cannot swallow it. This we share with many animals. Mama, who doesn't read books but reads people and dough and the weather, watched Mr. Lewis's hands and then looked at me. If you begin saying that your teacher is a monkey, she warned me, I will tie your shoelaces together and let you have some evolution on your face. I will not, I promised. I liked my teacher, anyway. He had an ear with a little nick in it, and I like to imagine a story where this nick came from something heroic, like rescuing a goat from a well, but he would never say, and I never asked. About once a week, a brown envelope with a German stamp and my name written in Papa's careful engineer handwriting, even though he is not an engineer, would come. He sent me a postcard, too, with a castle that looked like something from a dream after you've eaten too much. On the back he wrote in Greek that in a museum there he had seen a skeleton of a big animal with horns like a chair turned upside down, and he had thought of me. He wrote that if he had time, he would go to a different museum that had meteorites. He wrote that there were pastries in Germany that were like baguette but not as clever, and that he missed the sound of goats at 4 in the morning and the way the light is here when the day is thinking, maybe I will be hot, maybe I will be cool. When I wrote back, I told him about Ouranopithecus. I wrote the whole word with my new carefulness and put an exclamation point, which I usually avoid because they make me feel sorry for the sentence, as if it could not stand up by itself. I told him that I had held a fossil that the woman with the rope arms had let me hold a little piece for a breath-long second and that it is heavy, Papa, and that the heaviness feels like promise, and that when the earthquake came nothing in the cafe fell and I was not afraid, but afterwards I shook a little with my teeth and then I stopped. I told him Mama was well and Aunt Vasiliki was the same as always, and that Eleni had learned to whistle with a blade of grass between her thumbs and could make a noise that made the chickens in the yard lift their heads like they had heard their names. There was a talk in the schoolhouse 2 weeks after the quake. They put a sheet on the chalkboard like we were going to watch a movie, and the paleontologists brought a machine that showed slides like little windows on the sheet, and all of us sat on the wooden chairs that complain when anyone bigger than a child sits in them. The whole village was there, even people who say they don't believe in science because it smells like the city. The scientists showed us pictures of our ravine, of their notebooks, of the plaster jackets, and then pictures of other places far away: Ethiopia, a name that felt like a poem in the mouth, and a woman with a skeleton they said was called Lucy, and they told us gently that she was 3 million years old and an ancestor of ours, probably, not necessarily a grandmother but someone on the road that led to us. She walked upright, the woman with the ponytail said, put her hand flat and made a walking motion with 2 fingers, and the whole room leaned forward together. Ouranopithecus is older, an ape, and we still are not able to say where exactly on this big tree of life he sits and whether that tree branches towards us or towards the line that goes to gorillas and chimpanzees. The research continues. Continues, Costa said under his breath. He flicked a little glance at me and gave a grin. This is how we learn, the Greek scientist said from the front of the room. We hold both in our hands what we are sure of and what we are not sure of. We do not hold on to a promise we cannot keep. But we are honest. I liked how his voice didn't get big and show off. He acted as if the truth was in the quiet things, like the way a cat chooses a lap. They showed us the molars up close, their enamel like little mountain ranges, and the big round zygomatic arch that made the face wide. They showed us the places in the ravine like a treasure map. People asked good questions. Did he howl? Did he get cold? Would he have eaten goats? What color were his eyes? And the scientists said, we don't know, with pride, as if the not knowing was also a kind of treasure, because then there was still something for their children to find. After the talk, when the sheet had folded itself into obedient squares and the chairs complained backwards into the corners where they slept, I went up to the table where the notebooks and the small cases lay and put my finger on one of the photographs. Will you find a face?